I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the stolen land on which the university was built, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Indigenous storytelling, writing and creative work are acts of defiance and survival under colonisation, and we owe so much to the traditional owners and custodians of story and land. And this is our third guest for our Writers at Work series. The poet, essayist, novelist, prize winner and all-around star Omar Sakr, welcome. Omar is a poet and writer born in Western Sydney to Lebanese and Turkish Muslim migrants. He's the author of a brand new poetry collection, which I get to wave your book around for the, not that they can see, non-essential work published by UQP, as well as These Wild Houses, Cordite Books 2017, The Lost Arabs UQP 2019, which made a slew of lists for literary prizes and won the 2020 Prime Minister's Literary Award. Come on now.
We're good.
Omar beat COVID to be here. So let's give him a warm welcome to the class.
Thank you.
Do people often read your whole bio?
Like that's big upping the moment, you know what I mean? Like I beat COVID because I wanted to survive and be healthy, but like I am
you wanted to
here
be
nonetheless.
You wanted to be.
Wasn't for
Yeah.
this.
You wanted to be
But like
here.
it's fresh.
Come on, give us this. Give us this. Okay, so this class is Writers at Work, and it's all about the idea of work. What is work for writers? And we've been looking at it through lots of different lenses. We've been considering it as, the process and work of writing. We've been considering it as all the other things you do so that you can be a writer. We've been considering it from different angles of what enables us to be writers or gets in the way of our practice of writing. So I guess I just would like to start with that question. How do you understand the work of being a writer? And if it is it divisible from other forms of work for you, whether professional or personal? And of course, those things might have changed over your time as a writer.
Yeah. I mean, principally for me, the work of being a writer is understanding myself and the world that I'm in. More practically, it is getting paid for writing, right? That's the next step. But first and foremost, it's about using language to free myself, because it is in language that I was first trapped and abused and diminished. So as much as, especially in public, I am advocating for the writers to be paid, and I'm talking about the practical aspects of writing as work, I really do think of and need to emphasize the act of writing as a way of life, and as something that is essential. So I'm a full-time writer, meaning I pay my bills with my writing. I've been doing that for the past 5 years, which is not usual.
It's huge. Congratulations.
Thanks. I'm at the end of that road. I'm so tired. Because in order to be able to do that, you have to hustle really hard, and you have to do the writers' festivals kind of around the country every year. You have to have book length projects and multiple gigs like this one. Thank you. Hello. And so it's just a lot of juggling, a lot of movement, a lot of being on the road. And I have a baby now, and that has significantly altered my ability to do this kind of work to the degree that I was doing it before. And in fact, I just can't anymore. So I have to get a job. And the chance of there being a book from me again is like very small now. And if it is going to happen, it won't be for years. So Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, it's the
good.
beginning of a discussion more than an answer to a question, though. I guess, there's so much in your answer as someone with that relationship with language and that relationship with the work of writing as being a way to intervene in language that's structured you in a certain way that you said that you are using to make yourself free. And then you've got another thing here, which is this kind of economic hustle to be a writer. And then the kind of realization that, okay, if you have a family and there's all of this time that needs to be used up and these other kinds of economic realities, like how does that feel at this point, that reconciling of all of those different realities?
Yeah. It's on the one hand kind of devastating because I spent so much time and effort getting to this point where I have these books and I have this platform, and I really feel like I'm kind of at my peak as a writer. Not necessarily in terms of careers, just in terms of sentences. Like I'm fucking good right now in a way, and I have really high standards. And so I do not think very highly of my work previously. I'm all about now. And right now, I feel like I'm capable of so much more than I ever was before, but I no longer have the means to actually do it. So there is that little element of like devastation with that. On the other hand, I have this adorable little bundle of joy, and I can't be sad about having a baby. It's amazing, and it's brought this whole new dimension to my life. And I want to just spend time with him as well. So there's that element too. I don't actually want to go out and talk to people unless I have to for money. So,
Like right now.
like right now, a little bit,
So I'll just a related question, which might just be obvious, but I'm interested in your perspective. Do you think that like you won't be able to do the hustle, but will you be able to do some of the writing? And do you think that you have to exercise that muscle to continue to be at the height of your powers, to use that cliche? Or
yes.
Yeah, got to keep using it.
I think you do have to write. I think it's a muscle, like any, that can atrophy. So, not too much. It's a matter of degrees, though. Like the degrees between good and great, and it's so small. And between great and amazing, really, really small. And that's the kind of degrees that we're talking about. However, more important than writing is reading, and I'm sure you've all heard that a million times. But as far as practice and as far as exercising that muscle, I would say reading is more important, and I am able still to do that. So I'm not too worried about that part of it. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I think I'm going to skip these other questions about work and writing. Let's get into your work specifically. So you're writing about identity resists simplicity and all normative assumptions. I was wondering if you could talk about this way of working and whether representing complexity and identity impacts the way you work, whether in terms of process or with language itself.
I'm gonna have to run that by me one more time.
Okay, I'll just say it. I'll try.
An identity.
Yeah, we were talking about a little bit last week when we had a presentation on your work, and we were talking about representing an identity that can never be kind of pinned down, that is continually complex, continually can't be boxed in, and that exists in your work on a level of language, as well as maybe on a level of like what you set out to do with your work. And I wonder if you could talk about that.
Well, I mean, I feel like that's the task of anyone, because we're all complex, and you should, that should be your instinct, your desire to resist being boxed in as man, as woman, as ethnicity, as whatever, and in your work, defy that and transcend it. I mean, that I feel is surely a core part of being an artist. And that doesn't mean dismissing or ignoring those things. It's just about showcasing all of it all at once in a way that is beautiful and profound. So, simple. Yeah,
Beautiful and proud. So simple.
Yeah.
I think that that's a part of your art for sure, but I definitely think that there are lots of writers where it's about stripping things away to something that's less complex, whether that's in a genre space or whether that's on the level of language. Let's talk about poetry. Your new collection is called Non-Essential Work, which is a great title given that John Kinsella's description of the Lost Arabs was remarkable and essential work. Do you want to talk about how you decided on this title, whether it's Rye, how it introduces your vision for the collection or your work in general?
Yeah. So it comes from my poem, Diary of a Non-Essential Worker. And it's very much poking fun at the phrases that came into the public lexicon during the pandemic around, what is an essential worker and what isn't. And we had this paradox where we're being told, stay inside and watch Netflix and read books, and it's so important, and that's going to get you through. That's going to get you through. But then also we're not essential in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't quite make sense. So I want, but also, right, writers are, of course, always going to be saying things like, we're so important. And at the same time, is it as important as food and power? No, not really. And so, but the beauty for me in poetry in particular is that I can explore so many different angles. I can be wry, and I can be profound. I can be serious and ridiculous, and put it all together in a collection in a way that's, in some respects, easier than trying to do that in a novel.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think that's what I love about this collection, particularly. In one breath, there's something quite. Sometimes there's a moment of sorrow and resignation backed up very quickly by something very wry or very funny. I loved, you're writing about love under capitalism, which is one we all read this week, which I thought was really funny and wry and beautiful. And then in one of the versions of Relevant to the Day, you're writing about living together with a lover in this particular moment where no one's working, the landlord stays immune to our suffering, and we are still the best off of all our people unto the beginning of our species. Do you think that there's a particular relationship between poetry and capitalism, or your poetry and capitalism that you're untangling here that you want to speak about a bit?
Yeah, it's certainly something that's on my mind. I don't think it's necessarily specific to poetry. It is just specific to being alive in this moment, and within this system. And I think that's a question, I imagine anyway. I imagine that it's a question that everyone thinks about to some degree, or should be thinking about, which is, what is our labor contributing to? What does it mean, to be part of this system? It's particularly meaningful or important for me, I guess, because art is elevated by the state and used often in a particular way. I often think about, I have very grim thoughts. And I do sometimes wonder whether it's the kind of velvet glove over the steel fist. I do think about that idea of you're in lockdown and you should read books and watch movies and use these stories to distract you from the horrors that are ongoing. And I am frightened by the thought that I might be contributing to that. I don't want you to be entertained by me in such a way that you are looking away from what's happening in this world. And so, and listen, I love fantasy. I love science fiction. I love genre. It's what I'm reading, like 80%. Because, but personally, as a writer, what I've been doing very much is confronting these horrors and trying to find a way to live with it rather than look away from it, pretend it's not there and it's not happening.
It's interesting because I feel like that it's kind of a false dichotomy set up by commercial publishing of all kinds. That idea that, you know, art is either like distracting, take your mind off it, or it's something that has to really get to the center of things, when actually, you know, there's a lot of middle ground there.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that is the work of us as consumers or as readers and thinkers as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But so what I'm talking about isn't necessarily the ways in which various writers can use literature. It's about how it's used in the public, how it's talked about in public, and thinking about it from that perspective. So, and especially as well, having won the Prime Minister's Award, this is what ultimately was like stuck in my brain is, what does it mean to have my work associated with the Prime Minister's office, with Scott Morrison? Ugh, like, thank God he wasn't there. I would have fucking died. I would have died. I couldn't have handled it, you know? So thinking really literally about the connection between the public and the work, capital and the work, and trying to express that in various ways that are hopefully creative in this book.
Since you bring it up, let's talk about The Lost Arabs, which made bazillions of award lists, so many that you made me stop reading them out of your bio from your website, and was really critically acclaimed. It's marked by lyric and political urgency. So why do you think that the collection resonated so deeply with readers and critics, and what compelled you to write those poems if it was something different? But otherwise, just why do you think it resonated, I think, is what I really want to know.
Yeah, I started writing those poems as a response to the Arab Spring. It's a nonsense moniker from a Western columnist to describe a series of protests and uprisings in the Arab world. And I was very frustrated with the ways in which it was being talked about, the ways in which it was being constructed in the public. And I was thinking very much about what makes a country versus a colony, what makes a government and not a regime. And just thinking about violence and its legacies interpersonally, so the violences that I've experienced myself, and then more broadly as well, the violences that have been done to various communities in the name of justice or freedom or whatever. And, you know, the poems came. Why it resonated is not really a question I can answer. I think that's really something that the readers and judges and so on and so forth have to answer for themselves. I am compelled by that subject matter, and I always will be, because I'm Arab and I'm Muslim, and I'm queer, and Turkish, and it's a fucking lot, and it's a lot, and there's a lot of things being said about me and about my communities that are wrong, that are reductive, that are ridiculous and offensive. And so when I say that I'm trying to free myself, I do have a sense of being embattled. And yeah, needing very much to stake out a space in literature and in the public that puts to shame the nonsense caricatures.
Wow. Okay. And because carving out a space is more even than responding to. It's a much more powerful drive to say carving out a space. And then that in relation to like the Prime Minister's Literary Awards, like that's a space carved out in an emblematic way, right? Like, yeah.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting, these kind of contradictions, right? Where it's like, on the one hand, you've carved out a space to the point where you're acknowledged in the Prime Minister's Literary Awards. On the other hand, time to go to work because you've got a baby. There's this contradictions that we keep talking about in the work of being a writer. So what keeps poetry relevant and engaging for you as a practice or a form or both?
Yeah, so I have ADHD, and last year I was diagnosed with autism. So late in my life, and it's something I'm still trying to understand. But it's very funny that there's like a choir in the background. I'm just gonna
University of
say
Sydney.
that. What that means is I have very often in my life fallen out of myself. I'm very often not present. And poetry for me is a way back to myself. There are lots of gaps in my memories. I am frequently called oblivious, and I frequently am oblivious, whether it's my wife or it's my loved ones will often say to me, "Did you see that thing?" I'll be like, "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." Like, we're walking down the same street, we're engaged in the same activities, and they're experiencing a different world. That's a terrifying thing, really, to not be able to be present. And it was some years ago when I started writing poems, and I just said to myself, I'm just going to write what I see. And so I did. And it was a way to hold on to the day, because I don't have any other way to do so. And what I have found is that although I am oblivious in all of those moments, the I is somewhat immaterial because the body remembers. And I'll enter that space and the details will return to me. So poetry will always be relevant to me. It will always be essential. It will always be as important to me as breath. And so I am evangelical about it for that reason. I don't have the relationship to it that other people do, of it being a kind of discrete activity that you just kind of do and then don't do. I need it.
I'm just going to check the time. Does anyone want to ask a question? I've got heaps, as you know, but I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance. Yeah, Simon, I'll bring the mic up to you.
I would like to ask you a question, Omar, that did you ever receive threats from within your own community, Muslim community, when your works touch on sexuality? because I believe that the in Muslim community that the
Yeah.
homosexuality is actually not accepted.
Yeah. Have I received threats from them? No. Have I received disgust? Yes. I have received many threats from white supremacists for my work, which is more, I think, is better in a sense. You know, I don't mind that. If I'm pissing them off, I'm doing good things. In saying that, you know, I'm very much aware of that attitude in my community. It's a stupid attitude. It's divorced from our actual culture. It's divorced from our actual religion. And the real tragedy in my community and in my family is that what I have to face are people who believe themselves to be religious and who nonetheless have no understanding of our actual religion. What I mean by that is they quite literally have not read the Quran. They don't know the long literary history and scholarship that exists around it, not capable of even having the conversation. It's embarrassing, and it's a reflection of the damage done to us. It's a reflection of the stagnation that occurs in diaspora and of our poverty, our very real poverty. So people in my community, people in my family, and I'm speaking about, you know, we were poor and are poor. So the possibility exists that there are upper class Arab Muslims who are, you know, able to have that conversation in a very literate way and who may hold different views. I'm not sure. I can't speak for them. But suffice to say, I don't give a shit what they think. I've had a hard enough life as it is. I will speak and write my truth. And I'm very comfortable in my deen. I'm very comfortable in my faith because I have actually done the reading.
Anybody else?
She's laughing because I always ask questions. I was struck by something you said earlier, just before Simon's question about when you're in those moments of seemingly being oblivious, that your I becomes irrelevant and your body remembers. Do you, when you're writing, feel like it's the body that's driving the work? Or is it the I, or is the dichotomy also not as helpful there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I'm not entirely sure that I have a satisfying answer. I think it's a bit of both, which is to say that sometimes I initiate the process with a very clear idea. Idea is the wrong word, a clear image. And then it does feel like the body takes over. I think that's the case most of the time. It is rarely good if I'm writing without a sense of clarity. If I'm just writing in that kind of way where it's free form, I guess. I'm not the kind of person who just, and this is something that a lot of people encourage various reasons, just there's that whole artist's way. Are you familiar with this? Write various pages in the morning, doesn't work for me, but I'm just not that kind of writer. It's very precise. And if I'm just writing pages and pages, it's garbage. If I just let the body do its thing, there has to be at some point direction. Not to disparage, and if it works for you, it works for you. Like, to each their own path.
We've had a whinge about morning pages in this class before. We'll go. Chamberlain had his hand up first, and I'll come back to you. Go.
It's a quick two-parter. Sorry.
Please go on.
How often, because I'm going to assume that you might, but how often, if you do, get frustrated with being reduced to a hyphenated Australian writer? And have you had fleeting moments or serious considerations of producing future work that, for whatever reason, won't be connected to the social, political, racial concerns that make up such a big part of your work?
Yeah. To the first question, no. I had someone say to me a few years ago a very similar question. It was, aren't you tired of being reduced to Arab? And what I said to him was, how can you be reduced to a universe? Because there is a whole universe in that world, in that word, and I can spend the rest of my life exploring it, right? And not come to the end. I don't feel that it is a burden to be Arab or called Arab, to be Muslim or called Muslim, or with any of my identifiers and communities. What I'm frustrated by, and what I find, if not burdensome, then annoying, is how dull our discourse is, how uninteresting the conversations, which haven't changed or shifted in the years that I've been doing this, and the manner in which my work is often discussed, it's just so basic. It's so basic, and I really wanted to get from out of that beginner level, and I just wanted to rise a little bit, even if that little bit is critical. Like, even if you want to destroy me in a way that is intelligent and creative, please. I promise you I will love it far and away more than all the insipid and basic praise that I have read about my work and about myself. And that's what I want. I want better writing. The second question, I have forgotten. What was it? Will I write something that's not associated with the social political reality? Short answer, yes. Yes, I would, if given the time and the means. Like I mentioned earlier, I love science fiction and fantasy, and I would very much like to write some fantasy fiction. Would that be divorced from social and political realities? I don't think so. I don't think it's ever really possible. I think it would still in some way be a commentary on some of those things. I would have more fun though, writing it. So, yeah.
My question isn't about your work as body of work, but you working. So you talked about all the hustle and putting in the work and doing the festivals for years and years and years. Is there something that you wouldn't do again, or that you definitely would do again? Now that you've got all the experience and looking back, how do you think about it now?
Oh, Jeez. No, because the difficult part of that is
I know it's a what if. Could have.
no, but I have bills to pay.
Yeah.
So as long as I have bills to pay, right, I'm more than likely going to take whatever the gig is. It's not always true, right? I anything I wouldn't do again? No, I'd do it all again. Uh, absolutely. I'm trying to remember if I ever did anything for free. If I did, I would say don't do that. I would not do that again. But I was always pretty much on that, and across that. So I don't think that that was the case. And I'm rarely put in a position where I have to like say no to something out of an ethical concern, for example, because I think companies companies know or have learned that I'm not the kind of writer that they want. I was asked by a festival some years ago to write a poem for a Federation Square, which was a sponsor of the festival, it's Emerging Writers Festival. I didn't know that there was a company that looked after a public square, but there is. And I don't think they had any idea who I was or what my kind of work was. But anyway, I wrote a poem, and I think the first line references the Holocaust. They were like, "No, no, thank you. We do not want this work." And so I'd do that again though, because it was very funny, and it's still funny to me now, knowing that companies and they want fluff, they don't want my kind of work. So it's not a fun answer, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Does anyone else have? Yeah, great.
I was wondering if you wanted to, obviously no need to if you don't want to, but I was wondering if you had any more that you could talk about in terms of the recent diagnoses you mentioned about ADHD and autism, whether now sort of reflecting back on your writing process and or your perspective as a writer, if you've realized things that might be different to how non-neurodivergent people write, or their processes or their perspectives.
Sorry, so the question is, do I now see things differently with those diagnoses in mind as to my process, or?
Exactly, yeah. If you've had any reflections about or any realizations about the kind of writer that you might be, or the kind of the differences that you might have to other writers now, sort of with that realization or hindsight.
Yeah, no, not really, but that's just because I don't fully understand it. I got the diagnosis last year after like a year of going through the process, and then just didn't have the money to continue with the therapist. And so I had the diagnosis, but then couldn't talk to him about what it meant. So I'm a little bit still kind of very much needing to resume that and figure out exactly what it means. I'm wary of particularly in my writing, particularly publicly, kind of claiming because when you write, especially when I write authoritatively. What I have said before is that I'm attuned very much to the negative power of language, the negative power of authority, and I'm somewhat obsessed with declarative statements, with drama. Hello, queer. So I love reaching for it in a sentence. I don't feel that I can do that with these subjects because I just don't know enough about them, and I would hate to contribute to the misinformation that I know surrounds both of those conditions. That said, I'm thinking about it a lot. I'm thinking about it a lot, and I'm sure it will lead to reflections and it will influence my writing. And when it does, you'll see.
There'll be an essay or a poem. I'm really struck. I wanted to ask you lots of questions about language, but I'll just do one off the cuff because I'm so struck by, you know, your work is so lyric and the language is so powerful. You have a conflicted relationship with language whereby it's a mechanism of enslavement and also of making yourself free. But you also have like pretty defined relationships with aspects of language. Like I've never heard someone say, I love a declarative sentence to a group full of people, right? So I just wondered if you could talk, if you could just like, it's a wonderful declaration. We're happy for it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your relationship to language, how you came into this, you know, quite self-referential and knowing relationship with language that's nevertheless feels very passionate and alive from the way you talk and the way you write.
Yeah, I think it's related to these conditions that I have. And more specifically to anxiety and to uncertainty, right? So why I love declarative sentences, why I love these sentences that just say a thing boldly and you know, convince you in a way like this thing is true. And that's tied to that is my fascination with belief and how that shapes a person. So I grew up in a very religious family. So, but as I said before, they haven't read the Quran, right? So a lot of their religious beliefs, their literal life and death level beliefs are nonsense. This is an astonishing thing, right? Because they live in a way where they actively make gossip gospel. That's fucking amazing. So it's, you know, it's not, this is what we know comes from God. It's, this is what so-and-so down the street said is going to happen to you if you commit sin. It's extraordinary. So belief and authority and declarative sentences are all tied into that, how I grew up, but they also just smooth over uncertainties. And I think a lot of people approach my work as strictly autobiographical. It's just not. It's not, because I will think of a line and it will have that certainty and that drama, and I'll just be like, I want to see what happens next. I want to follow that line, or I want to destroy it in the next few lines. So I don't know that that's necessarily you know, an answer, but it's yeah, certainty and uncertainty, and not necessarily fixing one or the other, but playing with them.
Does anyone else have a question that they, Simon?
Sorry, because I'm quite interested in the repercussions of your work, actually, when it comes to from the reader's perspective. So I believe that some of your works have been translated into Arabic. And do you get different responses when your work is being read by the Arabic-speaking readership, as when your work is actually read by the English-speaking audience?
I haven't had much of a response, really. So I can't answer that question, you know, to the degree that you would want. I can say that the Arab who translated my poetry was quite fond of it. Right, he went to the effort of translating it and making it accessible in the language and publishing it in Al-Arabi Al-Jadid, the New Arab. And maybe I should ask him, actually. You know, I've never thought to ask him if he got, you know, strange reactions, but a lot of writers in the Arab world and are, let's say, they're not conservative. So, and this is also when you ask like about the threat inherent in writing this sort of writing, you're imagining a literate reader. And a lot of these people are not. They're not reading my work. And I've said this before about my family, you know, be in a lot more trouble if they bothered to read my work. And they don't. They're not really capable of it. I don't mean that they're not capable of reading the sentences. They're not capable of sitting still for that long. You know, they're just kind of, yeah. But I wish they would, actually. I wish we did have intelligent opposition and intelligent conversations about these subjects. Very often we do not.
I have one last question to talk to the autobiographical or personal aspect of your writing just briefly, because now, having read lots of your work over the past few weeks, I've encountered similar scenes in different places. And I'm just wondering if you can talk to drawing things from life, even though it might not necessarily be autobiographical, and, you know, why you're compelled to do that, what the pitfalls might be. Some of it, I guess, was in what you just said.
Yeah. So the issue is that I don't really believe in autobiography. I don't believe in biography. I don't believe in memory. I see memories as compelling fictions. And this comes back to this unbelievable uncertainty that drives me. I am not convinced. I am not convinced by my experiences. I'm not convinced by memories. And that is because we make them up. You know, that is factually the case, right? But you will know yourselves from, I'm certain, the many situations you've been in where you've asked someone, I remember that time, and they'll be like, no, that wasn't me. You're thinking of this, or you're thinking of this. And you'll realize that the thing in your mind that was a memory and had the certainty of memory was not true. Fucked up. It is. And so I just don't know what the usefulness is of calling something autobiographical. Are there things that I've drawn from my life as I understand it? Sure. I just could never do anyone in my life the disservice of saying, this is how it happened. There is a tremendous cruelty in authority, especially when you apply it to your life. And so I think it is much more useful and interesting to think of it instead as something constructed as a story and therefore literature.
Thanks for joining us.
For having me.
Zoom. Yeah, everyone in the Zoom.
It's up
Well,
there.
I've got my own
Yeah.
issues about what happened there with the black squares, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for coming along. We're going to have a 5-minute break. Yeah. And then we'll come back here, not to the classroom though. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very interesting. It is. I've never been in a university. There wasn't a technical.
Yeah.